Thank you all for joining us again for episode 19. That's what we're on, right? We can't say that to Americans. That is the theme of our episode today as we go through the evolving documentary on Hamas in the U.S. So again, with us here today is Jennifer Baker.
Hi, Laura.
Hi. All right, let's get started. You know, we've been talking about the late 2010s, and I want to go back for a second and talk about 2017 because Hamas published its second charter, known as the Document of General Principles and Policies. And in the second charter, several changes were made that we will get into that were designed to make Hamas appear more moderate. However, Hamas did not revoke its original charter, and their subsequent actions revealed that this second charter may have been a mere political tool, to gain favor with various governments. Critics speculate that a number of factors contributed to Hamas actually producing and releasing this document. We're going to hear from two experts on this, but one of the things Hamas sought to do in this second document, the General Principles, was to distance themselves from the Muslim Brotherhood, because a growing number of countries in the Middle East had begun to recognize the Brotherhood's agenda and had begun to take negative actions against the Brotherhood. And this included Egypt, and Hamas needed to maintain strong ties with these Arab countries, especially Egypt.
Okay, so what was the motivation of Hamas to publish the new manifesto? Hamas was trying to protect itself, to defend himself from attempts by the new government in Egypt and the new regime in the United States led by Donald Trump to take measures against Hamas, because Hamas in that time was the official branch of the Muslim Brotherhood. So Hamas was not interested to portray itself as an official branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, because the Muslim Brotherhood got a lot of negative attention from the Gulf states and Egypt and also Donald Trump administration. So Hamas decided to defend itself, to say, I'm not part of the Muslim Brotherhood, I'm not taking part in terrorist attacks, I'm only focused on the allegedly national battle against Israel.
So, Laura, was that the only change in the second charter?
No, there were others. Hamas changed some of its most radical comments from the first charter, again, without revoking that first charter. There were a number of issues that analysts believed attributed to this supplemental charter, but many felt it was another deceptive attempt by Hamas to portray themselves as wanting peace while using that as cover as they prepared for more acts of violence.
Well, I know that they have done that before, deceptively portraying themselves as wanting peace and compromise in order to buy time to do what they really want to do.
Yes. And, on that note, remember when Marzouk was deported in the mid-90s or in 1997 when he was deported to Jordan to join Khalid Bashal at Hamas's headquarters? And we showed an interview where he said that they wanted peace more than anybody. And then within a short time, Hamas dispatched that terrible triple suicide bombing to the pedestrian mall in Jerusalem that killed so many people.
I remember that. It's horrible.
So let's hear a little bit more from Dr. Barak on this second document that Hamas had published.
There was a dramatic shift in the vision or the way that Hamas perceived itself in its vision. I mean, to the document that he published in 2017, the new manifesto of Hamas, which was called the Document of General Principles and Policies. Now, this is a new manifesto, kind of moderate, or let's say an attempt by Hamas to portray itself as a pragmatic and moderate actor in the landscape of the Middle East. And I will explain what are the highlights and what was the context that it was published. But we have to remember that although that Hamas published this manifesto, it has not abolished at all the first manifesto from December 1988. This is only as we see it, and 7th of October proves it, this is only a cosmetic change in the manifesto and the vision of Hamas. The main goals remain the same, like the destruction of the state of Israel and establishing a Palestinian Islamic state. If we compare the two manifestos, the manifesto of 2017 and the manifesto of 1988, we see several prominent changes. So first of all, in the first manifesto, it was written very clearly that Hamas wanted to destroy the state of Israel and to liberate all the territory of Palestine from the north to the south. In the new manifesto of 2017, Hamas spoke about is willing to establish a Palestinian state on the borders and the territories of 1967. In other words, he accepted the solution of the two states. A second change was that Hamas, in the first manifesto, emphasized that he was fighting not only against Zionists, but also against the Jewish people around the world, the Jews, because they're, according to Hamas, and we have to remember that Hamas have also kind of anti-Semitic view and perception of the Jewish people. So Hamas mentioned that he wanted to, and that his main goal is also to fight against the Jews around the world because they were behind this allegedly decision makers in the West that were trying to strengthen the power of the Jewish state in the region. In the new manifesto in 2017, we see that Hamas emphasized that he was fighting only against the Zionists, not against the Jews, but against the Zionists. That means that he was fighting against everybody that was justifying the existence of Israel. Those can be like Zionist Christians, Zionist Muslims, and of course Jews. Another change is that in the first manifesto, Hamas emphasized that the only way to liberate Palestine was by using jihad, offensive, in violence. In the new manifesto of 2017, Hamas spoke about that jihad was also a very important tool to liberate Palestine, but also he was supporting also peaceful demonstrations or peaceful tools to liberate Palestine. Hamas wanted to, again, to portray itself as a moderate actor.
Well, that's interesting. Well, let's see what some of the media outlets were saying about this new charter or manifesto or the document of principles during this time.
There's been reaction in Gaza and the West Bank after Hamas unveiled its new charter. The document presented by the group's leadership in Doha on Monday appears to soften its stance on Israel. While still not recognizing the country's right to exist, Hamas dropped its commitment for Israel's destruction. The new political program also accepts for the first time the creation of a Palestinian state along the pre-1967 boundaries. The Israeli government has dismissed the move as a PR stunt aimed at fooling the world. In Ramallah in the West Bank, Palestinians gave their reaction. In the speech made by Hamas's Khalid Mashal, he was broadly trying to open up a channel with Israel, and you feel like he wants to say to Israel, please accept us, please negotiate with us. This was not like any other previous Hamas speech, and in general, Hamas is weakened by this. Some analysts say Hamas is trying to boost its standing with the outside world.
There are internal and external factors that led Hamas to soften its positions, to modernize its outlook, to become a party concerned with the international forums rather than internal forums.
The 1967 borders refer to those that existed before Israel captured the West Bank and East Jerusalem, territory it still occupies.
So that's very interesting, especially the part about settling for the 1967 borders, which would allow for the country of Israel to exist, which clearly was not an option for all of their existence until this time.
Right, completely opposite. Their first charter clearly said we must annihilate Israel. And we know from the 1993 Philadelphia meeting where they were willing to lie to the Americans, right, Like when CAIR co-founder Omar Ahmad said in that meeting, hey, fake like you're going one way when you're really going another.
Right, yes. We used to call that talking out of both sides of your mouth.
Yes, I am very familiar with that phrase. Well, let's take a look at what Osama Abuirshaid, remember he was formerly of the IAP and also the UASR and the co-founder and leader of the AMP. Let's look at what he had to say about Hamas's attitude towards a two-state solution. This interview was from 2021, and Abuirshaid implies Hamas agreed to the 1967 borders for political reasons only, and emphatically says that they did not abandon their principles of eliminating Israel, quote, from the river to the sea.
راينا ايش يعني عملت عشان الناس تفهم شو يعني
حماس تحدثت عن حل الدولتين ولا لا؟ بقولوا احنا ما بنقولش دولتين، بنقول دوله فلسطينيه على حدود ال 67، لكن هي ايش بتعني يعني؟ هل انا مقتنع انه حماس لا تؤمن بفلسطين من البحر للنهر؟ مستحيل. تؤمن بها من البحر للنهر، لكن عنده موقف مبدئي وعنده موقف سياسي. الموقف السياسي موقف موائمه مع اكراهات الواقع، لكن لا يتخلى عن المبدأ. أنا عندي هذه قناعة.
Well, he's pretty clear.
Yes, right? Let's take a look at a continuation of this interview of AMP leader Osama Abuirshaid, where he defends and seemingly justifies Hamas preventing one version of facts to the West and the truth to the others to further Hamas's overall goals.
قبول دولة في حدود 67 كان خطأ، وأنا انتقدته من البداية وما زلت أنتقده.
بس أنا دافعت عنه.
وانتقدته، لا هو قرار خطأ، لأنه هو كانوا يظن أنهم سيأخذون مقابله مكسب سياسي، لم يحصلوا على شيء، بالعكس، وسبب ارتباكا وسبب نوع من اللبس فيما يفهمه الناس عما تريده الحركة. لأنه أنت لما بتقول أقبل بدولة في 67 سيفهم منك قطاع من الناس على الأقل أنك تقبل بوجود دولة صهيونية إلى جانبها.
ولذلك لازم يكون عندنا خطاب اللي ذكره الأخ أنس، نحافظ على خطاب المثقف وخطاب المبدأ وخطاب السياسي، أو نخرج من عمل السياسي.
يتناقضوا الاثنين مع بعض يا أسامة، ما بيصير يكون عندي خطابين متناقضين.
مش متناقضين، متكاملين.
في فرق بين إني أنا أستخدم لغة يفهمها المثقف ولغة يفهمها غير المثقف، ولكن الموقف واحد. مش أنا بقول موقف للغربي وموقف للشرقي.
كيف بدك تقعد أنت وتعمل عمل سياسي وتجلس مع ممثلين مع دول؟ إيش بدك تقول لهم؟ تقول لهم أنا جاي معك من فلسطين للبحر للنهر، ما راح يسمع منك.
يعني هو سامع منك على ربع فلسطين ولا 10.
And he ends with, you can't say you want Palestine to be free from the river to the sea. Isn't that exactly, what they said in the 1993 Philadelphia conference between the U.S.-based Hamas leaders? We want to go back to the 1948 borders, but we can't say that to the Americans.
Yes, exactly. And it seems like exactly what he's saying, right?
Right.
Exactly in line with what the leaders of the HLF and the IAP and the co-founders of CAIR, Hadawat and Omar Ahmad, all collaboratively discussed in the 1993 Philadelphia meeting. But unfortunately, as we fast forward to the present, right, we see that they have made so much progress in the normalization of this narrative, this terroristic narrative, that in today's world, they can and are saying it on our streets and on our campuses. And we will get into that, shortly in the next episodes. Let's hear from another expert on Hamas, Dr. Matthew Levitt, to give his thoughts on the supplemental charter, this document of principles that Hamas published.
In 2017, Hamas came out with an update to its charter, but I think a lot of people missed the other things that were going on at the same time. They were calling for attacks in the West Bank. They were engaged in activities, sometimes even in cooperation with ISIS in Sinai. There was a tremendous amount of weapons smuggling going on. And then Khalid Mishal, who was the Hamas leader at the time, made it very clear. He said, and I quote, "We were and we still are in an open war with the criminal enemy Israel." Hamas, therefore, it can engage in whatever politics it wants to do, but he said it insists on the choice of jihad and resistance. This choice is Hamas's greater and first strategy. This is Hamas. So I don't put stock in things that, on the one hand, don't completely end the charter It's just kind of an amendment to the charter. The things in the original Hamas charter published in Chicago by the Islamic Association for Palestine when it first came out still stands. These are amendments. Hamas has periodically made, well, we could recognize two-state under certain circumstances for a period of time, but it's never a permanent thing. And the reality is that moderate Hamas statements have been a political ploy over and over and over again. I've forgotten how many times I've written about this already. Not as like an opinion piece that, Matt Levitt says so. Just look at what they say as they are doing something else, and then look at what they say a few days later. So they make sure to say for the Western media something that resonates with them, and they say something different to Al Jazeera Arabic or something else. At the end of the day, for all of the moderate things they might have said, they still were planning and then ultimately carried out October 7th.
Oh, and there's more news coverage from that time period. I think it's important to kind of see what the thoughts were at the time. Let's take a look at that.
The new charter is seen by some as a gambit by Hamas's outgoing leader Khaled Meshal to loosen the blockade, especially on the Egyptian border.
Hamas do not even want the Hamas people to look into this new document, because there are many radical elements within Hamas who do not like this moderation on the part of Hamas.
There's already been commentary in the Israeli media saying whatever the new language, Hamas will remain an anti-Semitic organization bent on Israel's destruction. While here in Gaza, with 2 million people dealing with daily poverty and power shortages, many here will wonder whether a new charter will really improve their lives. Harry Fawcett, Al Jazeera, Gaza.
So, Laura, I noticed on that Al Jazeera interview, there was an advertisement that had popped up for the Holy Land 5 program that Al Jazeera produced. The one where they reenacted the trial?
Yes, that's exactly right. They were advertising that on the same channel. And by the way, remember, on that program, AMP's Osama Abuirshaid deceptively said that the only evidence presented to show the HLF's guilt at trial were forged Israeli documents, which we've clearly disproven on this podcast by showing all of the evidence that we have collected.
Well, we can deduce from what we just saw that he believes truth is optional depending on who the audience is.
Yes, yeah, you're right. Now let's move on to the 2020 timeframe, because we were talking about 2017 for the second charter. The emergence of the Abraham Accords, which were accords designed to normalize relations between Israel and various Arab countries like the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, Sudan, and Morocco.
After decades of division and conflict, September 15th, 2020 was a historic day for peace. President Donald J. Trump brokered the signing of 2 peace agreements between Israel and Arab states, the first in more than a quarter century. They were between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and between Israel and Bahrain. Hello, I'm Christian James, a spokesperson for the U.S. Department of State in London, and this is U.S. policy on the Abraham Accords, explained. These 2 agreements normalized relations between these nations, establishing regional peace built upon shared interests, mutual respect, and friendship. 5 weeks later, the United States brokered yet a 3rd peace agreement, this time between Israel and Sudan. Collectively known as the Abraham Accords, through these agreements, each country recognizes the importance of strengthening peace in the Middle East and around the world through mutual understanding and respect for human dignity and freedom. They also promote interfaith and intercultural dialogue in order to advance a culture of peace through cooperation. They acknowledge that the best way to address challenges is through cooperation and dialogue, and the importance of tolerance and respect for every person. And finally, they call for an end to radicalization and conflict by supporting science, art, medicine, and commerce to inspire humankind, maximize human potential, and bring nations closer together. Through the Abraham Accords, Israel, the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Sudan are setting aside their differences and pursuing long-lasting peace in the region. They are now establishing embassies, exchanging ambassadors, and cooperating as partners on a variety of issues, including tourism, trade, healthcare, and security. The Abraham Accords are a monumental step in creating more opportunities for establishing peace, prosperity, and stability in the Middle East. I'm Christian James, and this is the U.S. policy on the Abraham Accords, explained.
So that would seem to be a very positive development toward peace, meaning a very negative development for Hamas, who opposed any sort of normalization efforts.
Yes, we know they oppose the normalization. Hamas condemned the Abraham Accords and accused the United Arab Emirates of stabbing Palestinians in the back.
Hamas has accused the UAE of stabbing Palestinians in the back by agreeing to a deal with Israel. The Palestinian group based in Gaza says the deal effectively rewards Israel for its occupational crimes.
So they oppose normalization between Israel and Arab countries, just as we saw in the 1994 meeting minutes of the U.S.-based Hamas infrastructure.
That is a really good point. Let's take a look back at that document, this meeting agenda from 1994 of the U.S.-based Hamas front organizations. This was the first document where CAIR appeared as part of that infrastructure. And we looked at it in an earlier episode, but it's very important. Let's revisit. What did they say in that document that was found at Ismail Abuirshaid's home about normalization's efforts? Of course, the normalization efforts they opposed arose out of a different set of accords, the Oslo Accords. But I think we will see that the principle is the same. This is the one where they lament about a vigorous campaign to normalize relations between Israel and the Muslim and Arab countries. And they said in this document the Jews' objective was clear, the approval of the peace process. We know Hamas opposed peace. And the U.S.-based leaders noted that if they did not do something, the normalization process would lead to them being the only ones who were extremists and radical. Very consistent.
Right. Yes. A historical document, but this movement's agenda has always remained clear. At least when they speak among themselves. They certainly cloak it when speaking to the Americans in the West, though.
Yes. You know what? Let's listen to what Dr. Levitt has to say about the Abraham Accords.
Coming off of the Arab Spring, where you had uprisings, first in Tunisia and in Egypt, and in Yemen and in Syria, etc., throughout the Arab world, there was a growing recognition that the types of things that many people in the Middle East wanted, that many governments wanted or now needed to provide, were things that the Israelis excelled at. There was also a concern about cooperating against extremists. There was a big concern about the Muslim Brotherhood at the time, and of course Hamas is the Palestinian wing of the Muslim Brotherhood, but also a concern about the rise of Iran and Iran's taking advantage of some of the instability that was created by the Arab Spring. And so by September 2020, the U.S. government helps shepherd in what ultimately became known as the Abraham Accords, which were a normalization process, most importantly, between Israel and the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain, but then also Morocco, Sudan, and even to this day remains open to others. I believe that one of the most important reasons for Hamas in carrying out October 7th when it did was fear that of the potential for normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. That was more of the precipitant event rather than the underlying cause. Hamas had already been well along the planning for this concept already. But when they saw the prospect of Israeli-Saudi normalization as a new round, perhaps, of the Abraham Accords, this for them was an absolute crisis. Now, most Palestinians might say the opposite. Finally, a major Arab state was demanding real things of Israel, real things, tangible progress towards Palestinian self-rule. But for Hamas, that was terrible because they don't want self-rule. They don't want progress towards a two-state solution. Hamas hasn't been fighting Israel. Hamas didn't carry out October 7th for lack of a two-state solution. Hamas is pushing a one-state solution in which there is no Israel and in which there is no secular Palestinian state. There's an Islamist Palestinian state. So if you're in a situation where, you know, the Israelis are going to be partnering with moderate Arab states are going to demand Israel do things that move things towards Palestinian self-rule and ultimately some type of two-state solution. if you're Hamas, this is terrible because you're the ones who are going to get sidelined. And so they had to do something to completely upend things. It's telling that for all of this really serious tension that October 7th and the war that followed has created around the world, but especially within Arab and Muslim states, Arab and Muslim communities, all the way circle around to Western college campuses, some of which is real, some of which is created. But for the real, sincere people seeing these images of what's going on in Gaza on TV, and that hurting in a very real way, that has not led to any of the Abraham Accord states pulling out. It's to the contrary. It's given those countries, the United Arab Emirates in particular, a platform in which to have a much more serious dialogue with the Israelis that the Israelis take very seriously. And the fact that conversations about potential, not today or tomorrow, but not in the far distant future either, normalization between Israel and Saudi Arabia. Some people even talk about something short of normalization, an end to belligerency perhaps between Israel and Syria, maybe even if Hezbollah weapons are dealt with, Israel and Lebanon. There's a corner that we're in the process of turning that started with those Abraham Accords, and they come down to cooperative effort to combat extremism. They come down to demands by Arab states that Israel do or not do certain things vis-a-vis the Palestinians. The Abraham Accords, under the Abraham Accords, the UAE insisted that Israel not take certain steps in the West Bank and in terms of settlement building. And it also had to do with cooperation not in any offensive way, but in a defensive way against threats from Iran. And in particular, cooperative Middle East air defense, or MEAD. You'll recall that the Houthis, at Iran's behest, fired missiles at the airport in Abu Dhabi. And the Emiratis asked the United States for technology, anti-aircraft technology to shoot down rockets, etc. And the United States, not for lack of affinity with the UAE, but because our bureaucracy is so massive and slow, simply couldn't say yes in a timely manner. And the UAE went to France, and they got some systems from France. And those systems are good, but they're not excellent. Well, the Emiratis now have certain systems from Israel. They don't necessarily have all 4 levels of the Israeli system, but they have a lot more than they had before. And if you look at the Iranian airstrikes on Israel a year ago, October, and then in April, there's never been a greater commercial for who is the biggest destabilizing actor in the region, Iran. More rockets in that first barrage fell in Jordan than fell in Israel. And you also saw the greatest possible commercial for the need for and the utility of integrated regional air defense. What the United States and Israel and a bunch of Arab states, some of whom have treaties or normalization with Israel and some that do not, did cooperatively together, sharing radar information, etc., was amazing. And pretty much every country in the region wants in on that. I'm not saying it's going to be easy. I'm not saying that anybody can or should ignore what's happening in Gaza. Obviously not. But we need to get beyond a point where Hamas is in control of Gaza. This is a governing entity that came out after October 7th and said, look, we didn't do this to better the situation of Gazans. We didn't do this so that more people could work in Israel. We weren't trying to improve the economy. We're trying to kill Jews, to kill Israelis. So what we need now in Gaza, and for that matter in the West Bank, is Palestinian leadership that prioritize dealing with the needs of their Palestinian constituents above killing their neighbors. And that is possible, but not with Hamas.
So did CAIR and AMP seem to support the accords?
Well, let's take a look at one of their press releases on the issue. The short answer is no, as would be expected. CAIR condemned the Abraham Accords using terms like human rights abuses, dictatorships, and authoritarian governments, claiming that the accords were, quote, nothing more than an arms deal, when the purpose of the accords were to promote peace and prosperity in the Middle East.
Well, CAIR's description of these accords seems to omit any positive developments like peace and prosperity, which is what these countries really appear to be seeking.
Yes, right on point. Well, thank you all for joining us. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.